Welcome to the Sony Cameras Quick Start Guide. This is going to get you up and running with any of the Sony cameras here at Cornerstone really fast. So we have three Sony cameras. We have the A7 Mark IV, which you're looking at. We also have the A6300, and we have this old Sony NXCam. So hopping into it, we're going to look at focus and zoom, and then how to adjust our exposure and white balance. So coming around to the front of it, this ring right here is going to control our zoom. This ring will control our focus. Now if I set this to manual focus, now we can use that outer ring to control our focus. So let's zoom in here. And then you'll notice when I rotate that, I have manual control of exactly where it's focusing. Now I'm going to set that back to autofocus. For adjusting exposure, we have our three options here. We have shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Now, in the training portal, there is a video on the exposure triangle and the relationship between these three different settings and how they all work together and affect the image, so definitely check that one out. But here, we're just going to look at how you actually just change it on these different cameras. So in the case here on the A7 Mark IV, we can use this dial here to change our aperture, similar to the Canon. Now this isn't the default setting of a Sony camera. If you were to just pick up any random Sony, this is how I have it set so that there's no confusion between the Sony and the Canon cameras. But we can use this dial here then to control our aperture. And then this dial up here is going to control our shutter speed. And then finally, there's a dial on the front of it for our ISO. So here's that dial on the very front that controls our ISO. And this is the one that you likely will be using the most. So you'll notice when I change it, there goes our ISO. All right, now let's look at white balance. So to get to white balance, I have it mapped to the down arrow here, and that gets us into our white balance settings. We have all these different options, and oftentimes I might set up a custom one so that I can save a certain preset. But for demonstration, I'm gonna go to this Kelvin scale here where we can just manually set a new temperature. I'm going to press over to on the right arrow to go over to it, and then I can cycle through the different options here. Now you'll notice when I go up, the image gets warmer, and as I go back down, the image gets cooler. So I've also got a video in the training portal that'll show you a little bit more in depth white balance and how that all works, but that's just how you get to it on this camera. If I press the right arrow again, it'll get me to my tint settings to change the tint between green, magenta, blue, amber. And so you'll notice I have it going towards magenta a bit to match up with some of our other cameras. All right, now let's take a look at image stabilization. To get to that, I'm going to press the FN button, which will bring open this function menu. And this menu is totally customizable. This is just the way that I have it laid out. And I'm going to go over to steady shot here, and if I turn it off, that'll have no stabilization. If I turn it to standard, that'll be the in-body image stabilization where the actual sensor in the camera is being stabilized. But then if I set it to active, you notice how it kind of zooms in a bit there on the image? It's also using digital stabilization on top of the hardware stabilization to just give us an even more steady image, and this will be great if you were to use this camera in a handheld scenario. Now typically we've been using this camera as our pre-service show camera, so it's just mounted on a tripod. None of these settings really need to get changed, but if this camera gets used in a different situation, now you know how to get to anything on it. So now let's take a look at the other two cameras that we have here. All right, another Sony camera that you may encounter is one of these A6000 series. So in this case we have an A6300. And unfortunately, the screen is broken on this particular camera. But what you can do is actually look into the viewfinder here, and you'll be able to see all your settings. It's certainly a bit of a hassle, but it does work. So starting off again with zoom and focus, this dial right here is going to control your zoom, and then this dial is for focus if you're using manual focus. This little rocker will also do your zoom. So to get to the auto manual focus setting on this camera, I'm going to make sure that this switch is in upright position towards AF/MF, and then I'll just press in on that button there, and that'll change it to manual focus. Now you'll notice when I rotate this ring, you'll see the focus changing. going to press this button again and go back to autofocus. All right, now let's look at adjusting our exposure. So you'll notice across the bottom of the screen, we have the same three settings we've been seeing: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Now let's go ahead and change those. So I'm going to rotate this dial right here, and that's going to change my aperture. Next, up here, we have shutter speed. So if I rotate this dial, you'll notice my shutter speed changing. And then finally, for ISO, I'm going to push to the right here where it says ISO, and that's going to bring up my ISO settings. And then I can rotate this dial and scroll through them. And then finally, let's look at white balance. So to access white balance, I have it mapped to the down arrow here. And you can see I'm set to a custom white balance. Now if I press to the right, that'll let me get into those settings for the tint of that custom white balance. Now this custom white balance is set up using a gray card. So if you wanted to make a little adjustment to the 5700, we wouldn't be able to do that. But if you wanted to set something up from scratch, we could go over to color temperature and then set it wherever we need. And then pressing the right arrow, we can access those tint controls. But in this case, we have it set up on custom 2. All right, now we're going to look at our old Sony NXCam. This is actually the first camera that Cornerstone had, but it's still keeping up, so we're using it. So on the front of it, on the lens here, sort of like the Canon, it's got a few different rings on it. And this first one here will do your focus if you're set to manual focus, but we typically just leave this camera in autofocus. The second one here is for your zoom, but we have a on the tripod handle, we have a zoom rocker, so you can see right there I'm not touching it and it's zooming. So we typically don't use that. But this third one here you may need to use. This one controls the iris or the aperture. So you'll notice the image getting darker and brighter as I change that. In this spot, we've been typically just running it at f3.4. But sometimes if it is a little bit too bright, maybe you come up to like f4. Now notice when we zoom all the way out, we can go down to f1.6, which is really great, but we can't do that when it's zoomed in all the way. There we have to do 3.4. So what we want to do is when we're zoomed out, we want to set that to f3.4 because we don't want it getting darker and brighter depending on how far you're zoomed in. Now in certain circumstances, you may need to do that. Say if it's like communion and you're trying to get a group of people and it's just too dark, you may use it there, but just make sure that you set that back to f3.4 before going back into the stage so that you have a nice consistent zoom without the exposure changing. So going from left to right here, we have our aperture, our ISO, or actually gain in this case with video cameras, and our shutter speed, and then our white balance. So to change our ISO or gain, we're going to use these three different presets. So we have low, medium, and high. So typically we want to leave it on low so that we're not adding a lot of gain and introducing a lot of noise into the image. But sometimes maybe if the pastor's on the floor, you may need to go over to medium, and then high might be like Christmas Eve candlelight service and the room is, you know, nearly pitch black and you have to really kick up the gain there. But typically we'll just leave that to low and possibly medium. Also on the side here is our auto and manual focus settings. So if we set it to manual focus, now we can use that first ring that I showed you to adjust your focus. But we'll set it back to auto. All right, if we need to make a change to the white balance, we're going to do that by going to the menu here. And then in the first menu option here, we're going to scroll down till we get to white balance temperature set. And you notice it's set to 4200. And we can go up, we can go down, put it wherever we need it. And then we'll back out. And that is how you set it. And you'll notice that number reflected right here. And then the other white balance setting, and this is definitely more of an advanced thing to get to on this camera, is our magenta green shift. So don't mess with the white balance unless you need to. Typically that's going to be the video director again who's going to be making those adjustments to match up all the cameras. But if you need to get to it, here's how you do it. We're going to go over to picture profile here and then use picture profile 1 that I've set up. Go to settings, and then scroll down until we get to white balance shift. And then we're going to go to this magenta green setting here. And you'll notice it is +3. So it's getting a little bit more magenta in the image. You can see when I go here, it looks a little more green. I go up, looks a little bit more magenta. So it's set to +3, and that's just helping it match with some of our other cameras a little bit better. So that's how you use the various Sony cameras here around Cornerstone. As you can see, unfortunately, they're all a little bit different because they're different lines of cameras, different ages of cameras. But now you should have a good idea on how to operate any of them, change your zoom, your focus, and your exposure. So thanks for watching. Go check out those other videos I mentioned, and we'll see you next time.